There is something strange about human beings. We can know exactly what is hurting us and still return to it. We can recognize the relationship that keeps breaking us, the habit that keeps weakening us, the fear that keeps limiting us, the thought that keeps poisoning our confidence, and still repeat it. We promise ourselves that this time will be different. This time, we will finally set the boundary. This time, we will stop seeking approval. This time, we will finish what we started. This time, we will stop returning to people who cannot love us the way we need. This time, we will speak when something feels wrong. This time, we will stop shrinking ourselves to make other people comfortable. And for a while, we may actually believe it. Something feels different. We feel motivated, clear, almost certain that an old chapter has ended. But then life creates the right conditions. Someone rejects us.
Someone criticizes us.
Someone withdraws. An opportunity becomes real. A relationship becomes intimate. Success becomes possible. Failure becomes possible. And suddenly, the person we thought we had left behind returns. The same fear, the same reaction, the same silence, the same need for approval, the same impulse to run, the same attraction to what we already know will hurt us. And afterward, we ask ourselves a painful question. Why am I still like this? Carl Jung's psychology offers a disturbing answer. Perhaps you have been trying to change the wrong part of yourself. Because the part of you that says, "I want to change," is not necessarily the part of you that has been controlling your life. Beneath your conscious intentions exists an entire psychological world you did not deliberately create. Old emotional patterns, unconscious beliefs, rejected desires, protective identities, complexes, fears. Roles you learned so early that you no longer remember learning them. And these forces do not disappear simply because you have decided to become someone different. This is why a person can change almost everything around themselves and somehow recreate the same life. Different relationship, same emotional wound. Different workplace, same need to prove themselves. Different friends, same feeling of being unseen. Different opportunity, same self-sabotage. Different year, same inner conflict. At some point, you have to ask, what if the pattern is not following you? What if you are carrying it? And if that question makes you uncomfortable, stay with it. Because discomfort is not always a sign that an idea is wrong. Sometimes it is the first sign that an idea has reached something you have spent years protecting. Jung understood that real transformation does not begin when you create a better version of yourself. It begins when you discover the hidden version of yourself that keeps recreating what you are trying to escape. And once you see that person clearly, change becomes something very different. It is no longer, how do I create a new life? It becomes, what inside me keeps rebuilding the old one? That is the question we are going to follow. And if this kind of exploration helps you see your own patterns more clearly, subscribe and stay with The Kingdom Within. Because what we are about to uncover is not simply why people fail to change. It is why part of us may secretly resist the very transformation we consciously desire. And the first place we have to look is at the person you believe yourself to be. The identity you never chose. Think about the person you are today. You probably have a fairly clear description. Maybe you believe you are introverted, responsible, independent, sensitive, strong, anxious, ambitious, kind, difficult, quiet, generous, insecure. You might say, I've always been this way. But have you ever asked where that way came from? Because there was a time before you had a conscious identity. You entered the world without knowing what kind of person you were supposed to become. Then, something happened. You began receiving information, not through philosophy, through consequences. You expressed anger and discovered how the people around you responded. You cried and learned whether vulnerability brought comfort, irritation, rejection, or silence. You succeeded at something and noticed whether achievement produced attention. You disagreed and discovered whether disagreement was safe. You needed something and learned whether having needs made you lovable, difficult, weak, demanding, or invisible. Slowly, you began adapting. If being quiet created safety, you became quieter. If achievement created love, you became successful. If being useful created belonging, you became useful. If strength earned respect, you hid weakness. If vulnerability brought humiliation, you learned not to need anyone. If pleasing people prevented conflict, you became agreeable. And eventually, adaptation became identity. You stopped thinking, "I learned to behave this way." You began thinking, "This is who I am." This distinction is enormous, because if something is who you are, changing it feels like betrayal. But if something is an adaptation you once needed, then changing it may be growth. Jung called the socially adapted personality the persona. The persona is not inherently false. Every human being needs some way of interacting with the world. You behave differently with a stranger than with someone you deeply trust. You develop professional roles, social roles, family roles. The problem begins when the mask becomes indistinguishable from the face, when you become so identified with the role that you can no longer imagine yourself outside it. Imagine someone whose identity is, "I am the strong one." Everyone depends on them. They solve problems. They remain calm. They rarely ask for help. People admire their strength. So strength becomes more than a quality. It becomes psychological territory. Then one day, life overwhelms them. They need support. But asking for help does not merely feel uncomfortable. It feels like becoming someone else, because their entire identity has been built around never needing anyone. So what do? They suppress the need. They withdraw. They become irritated. They insist they are fine. Not necessarily because they do not want support, but because accepting support would contradict the person they believe they must be. Now imagine another person whose identity is, "I am the nice one." They avoid conflict. They understand everyone. They forgive quickly. They rarely say no. People describe them as kind. But somewhere beneath that kindness is anger. Years of it. Anger at being overlooked. Anger at being used. Anger at always being available. Anger at never saying what they really think. But anger does not fit the persona. So the anger has nowhere conscious to go. It enters the shadow. And then something strange happens. This person begins encountering selfish people everywhere. People who say no. People who prioritize themselves. People who speak directly. People who refuse to apologize for their needs. And these people provoke an unusually intense reaction. How can someone be so selfish? Maybe they are selfish. But Jung would ask another question. Why does this particular behavior disturb you so much? Because sometimes what we condemn most intensely in another person is connected to a capacity we have forbidden in ourselves. The person who cannot say no becomes enraged by people who can. The person who suppresses ambition judges ambitious people. The person who hides vulnerability despises weakness. The person who never allows themselves pleasure criticizes people who enjoy life freely. And suddenly we begin to see why changing behavior is so difficult. The behavior is connected to an identity, and the identity is connected to everything that identity had to exclude. You cannot deeply transform one without eventually encountering the other. This is where most attempts at change remain superficial. We say, "I need to become more confident." But we never ask why confidence became dangerous. We say, "I need better boundaries." But we never ask what we fear will happen when someone is disappointed in us. We say, "I need to stop procrastinating." But we never ask what completing the work would expose us to. We say, "I need to stop choosing unavailable people." But we never ask what genuine intimacy would demand from us. The conscious mind wants a new behavior. The unconscious wants to preserve an old arrangement. And until you understand that arrangement, you may spend years fighting yourself without knowing what you are fighting. Why familiar pain can feel safer than freedom. This is one of the strangest paradoxes in human psychology. People do not always choose what makes them happy. They often choose what confirms what they already know, even when what they know hurts. Suppose you grew up believing that love had to be earned. Maybe affection appeared when you performed well, when you behaved, when you helped, when you achieved, when you became whatever other people needed. Years later, consciously, you may say, "I want someone who loves me for who I am," and you mean it. Then you meet someone who does. They are consistent, emotionally available, interested. There is no confusing game, no disappearing, no constant uncertainty, no need to prove yourself. This should feel wonderful. But instead, something feels wrong. You call it lack of chemistry. You feel bored. You become suspicious. You begin looking for flaws. Then someone else appears, distant, unpredictable, sometimes warm, sometimes cold. And suddenly, chemistry, obsession, intensity. You cannot stop thinking about them. Why? Because sometimes what we call chemistry is recognition. Not recognition of what is healthy, recognition of what is familiar. The psyche says, "I know this story. I know how to earn love. I know how to wait. I know how to prove myself. I know how to interpret silence. I know how to chase. I know how to hope." But healthy love may require a skill you never developed: receiving. And receiving can feel more frightening than chasing because chasing allows the old identity to survive. You remain the person trying to become worthy. Receiving asks you to consider that perhaps you already are, and that can destabilize an entire psychological structure. This principle reaches far beyond relationships. A person accustomed to financial instability may unconsciously create chaos when stability begins appearing. Someone accustomed to being ignored may sabotage themselves when their work finally attracts attention. Someone who has built an identity around struggle may feel strangely empty when life becomes peaceful. Someone who believes they are unlucky may distrust opportunities. Someone who has always felt powerless may repeatedly hand their authority to others. This does not mean people consciously want suffering. That would be an unfair simplification. It means the unconscious often prefers continuity, because continuity protects identity, and identity creates psychological orientation. Even a painful identity answers the question, "Who am I?" Freedom may remove the pain, but it also removes the answer. And suddenly, another question appears. Who am I if this problem no longer defines me? Who are you if you no longer need approval? Who are you if you stop rescuing everyone? Who are you if you are no longer the victim? Who are you if you succeed? Who are you if you become visible? Who are you if someone actually stays? Who are you if you stop fighting? These questions reveal why transformation can produce fear at precisely the moment life begins improving. Because sometimes you are not only leaving a problem, you are leaving a self. And the ego may experience that as a kind of death. Not physical death, psychological death. The end of an identification, the end of a story, the end of the familiar person who knew how to survive inside the old world. This is why Jung's idea of individuation is much deeper than ordinary self-improvement. Self-improvement says, become a better version of who you are. Individuation eventually asks, but who exactly is the you being improved? And what if that identity itself is incomplete? What if the person you have spent years trying to perfect is only one fragment of a much larger psyche? That question takes us somewhere the ego rarely wants to go, into the shadow. And this is where the real reason you keep becoming the same person begins to reveal itself. The shadow is not trying to ruin your life. When people first encounter the idea of the shadow, they often imagine something dark hiding inside them, something destructive, something that must be controlled. But Jung's understanding was far more subtle. The shadow contains what your conscious identity could not accept, and that means the shadow does not contain only what you consider negative. It also contains unlived life. Think again about the child who learned to be agreeable. What had to disappear for that identity to survive? Perhaps anger. But beneath anger may have been assertiveness, the ability to protect a boundary, the ability to say no, the ability to disappoint someone without collapsing into guilt, the ability to choose themselves. Now think about the child who learned to remain invisible. What entered the shadow? Perhaps attention-seeking behavior, but also visibility, expression, creativity, the desire to be recognized, the courage to occupy space. Think about the person who became relentlessly independent. What was rejected? Dependence, perhaps, but also tenderness, trust, receiving, the ability to say, "I need you." The shadow is therefore not simply a warehouse of psychological darkness. Sometimes it is where your unused strength has been waiting. And this creates a fascinating problem. You may consciously want to change, while the very qualities required for that transformation remain trapped inside the shadow. You want boundaries, but your aggression is in the shadow. You want leadership, but your authority is in the shadow. You want intimacy, but vulnerability is in the shadow. You want creativity, but spontaneity is in the shadow. You want confidence, but your desire to be seen is in the shadow. You want freedom, but the part capable of disappointing others is in the shadow. So you try to build a new life using only the qualities your old identity permits. And then you wonder why transformation feels impossible. Imagine trying to leave a prison while refusing to use the key because you were taught that touching it makes you a bad person. That is what psychological development can feel like. The qualities required to leave your old identity may initially feel wrong. This is why someone learning boundaries often feels selfish. Someone learning to speak directly may initially feel rude. Someone learning to rest may feel lazy. Someone learning to receive may feel weak. Someone learning to value themselves may fear becoming arrogant. Someone learning to stop rescuing others may feel cruel. The old identity interprets unfamiliar behavior through its old moral vocabulary. So growth feels like wrongdoing. And this is where many people retreat. They say, "This isn't me." Exactly. It isn't the version of you that was allowed to exist before. That does not necessarily mean it is false. It may mean it has been waiting. The question is not whether every impulse from the shadow should be acted upon. Of course not. Integration is not impulsivity. If you discover rage, integration does not mean attacking people. If you discover selfishness, it does not mean abandoning empathy. If you discover ambition, it does not mean becoming ruthless. Integration means asking, what psychological capacity is hidden inside this rejected material? Anger may contain the energy to protect yourself. Envy may reveal an unlived desire. Jealousy may expose insecurity or attachment. Aggression may contain assertiveness. Selfishness may contain self-preservation. Rebellion may contain independence. The goal is not to obey the shadow. The goal is to understand it well enough that it no longer has to control you from underground. Because what remains unconscious does not become harmless. It becomes indirect. And indirect psychological forces are extremely powerful. They appear as attraction, repulsion, projection, compulsion, repeated choices, sudden emotional reactions, and sometimes self-sabotage. Why you sabotage the life you say you want. Imagine that you have spent years wanting a certain opportunity. You talk about it, think about it, prepare for it. You tell yourself, if I ever get the chance, I won't hesitate. Then the chance comes, and something unexpected happens. You hesitate. Suddenly you notice every possible risk. You decide the timing isn't right. You convince yourself that you need more preparation. You become unusually tired, distracted. You procrastinate. You miss an important deadline, or you create a conflict that gives you a reason to walk away. From the outside, it makes no sense. You wanted this, so why would you sabotage it? Because consciously wanting an outcome does not mean every part of your psyche agrees with what that outcome requires. Success does not simply give you something. Success asks you to become someone capable of containing it. And that person may threaten your existing identity. Suppose you have spent your life seeing yourself as overlooked. You may hate being overlooked. You may dream of recognition. But being overlooked also protects you. Nobody expects too much. Nobody examines you closely. Failure can remain hypothetical because you were never fully tested. Your unrealized potential remains perfect. Then suddenly people begin noticing you. Now your work can be judged. Your ability can be measured. Expectations appear. And the identity that once complained about invisibility discovers something frightening. Visibility has consequences. So part of you wants recognition. Another part wants safety. And self-sabotage can become the compromise. You approach the thing you desire, but never completely enter it. Close enough to preserve hope, far enough to avoid exposure. This pattern appears in relationships too. You say you want intimacy, then someone gets close. Now they can see you, not the persona, you, your insecurity, your contradictions, your need, your imperfections. So you become critical, distant, restless. Perhaps you suddenly become attracted to someone else. Perhaps you decide you need more freedom. Perhaps you provoke a conflict. Then the relationship ends, and you return to the familiar conclusion: nobody stays. But look carefully. The conclusion may have helped create the conditions that confirmed it. This is one of the most painful things about unconscious patterns. They can produce evidence for themselves. If you believe people abandon you, you may behave in ways designed to protect yourself from abandonment. You become suspicious, demand reassurance, test people, withdraw before they can withdraw, choose unavailable partners. Eventually, the relationship collapses, and the psyche says, "See, I was right." The pattern survives because reality appears to confirm it. Jungian psychology asks us to interrupt this circle by becoming conscious of our participation. Not to blame ourselves for everything that happens. Other people have agency. Circumstances matter. Life contains genuine injustice and unpredictability. But wherever our own unconscious participation exists, consciousness gives us something blame never can: choice. And choice is the beginning of change. The ego would rather be right than free. There is a sentence people rarely say aloud: "I would rather keep suffering than discover that my identity was wrong." But psychologically, we sometimes behave as if this were true. Suppose you believe people cannot be trusted. Then you meet someone trustworthy. This creates a problem. If you allow the new evidence in, your worldview must expand. But worldviews do not surrender easily. So instead, you may search for evidence that the person is hiding something. You analyze every inconsistency, every delay, every imperfect sentence. You wait. And eventually, because every human being is imperfect, you find something. Relief. You knew it. People cannot be trusted. The identity survives. Or perhaps your belief is, "I am always overlooked." Someone appreciates you. You dismiss it. They're just being nice. Someone compliments you. They don't really know me. Someone chooses you. They'll change their mind. Notice what is happening. Positive evidence is being rejected because it threatens the old psychological conclusion. The ego is not necessarily searching for truth. Sometimes it is searching for continuity. It wants reality to remain interpretable through the identity it already knows. This is why people can defend beliefs that make them miserable, because the belief may hurt, but losing it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty asks you to become psychologically responsible in a new way. If you are not inherently unlovable, then you may have to risk love. If you are not incapable, then you may have to try. If you are not powerless, then you may have to choose. If everyone is not against you, then you may have to examine your own defenses. If failure is not inevitable, then you can no longer hide indefinitely behind the prediction of failure. Freedom removes excuses along with limitations, and that can be terrifying. The old identity may therefore create arguments for its own survival. It says, "Don't trust this. Don't try yet. You're not ready. This isn't who you are. People like you don't embarrass yourself. They'll leave eventually. Stay where you understand the rules." And because the voice sounds like your own thinking, you rarely question who is speaking. But what if some of your thoughts are not instructions? What if they are simply echoes of an identity trying to remain intact? That possibility creates a new relationship with the mind. Instead of asking, "Is this thought true?" you begin asking, "What identity does this thought protect?" That is a much more dangerous question, because suddenly the thought cannot hide behind familiarity. You may be living a life that was chosen for you. There is another layer to this. Not every identity begins inside the family. Some are given to us by the collective world around us. Society quietly tells you what a successful life should look like, what you should desire, what should impress you, what should frighten you, what age certain things should happen, what kind of person deserves admiration, what kind of life means you have failed. And because these messages are everywhere, they can become invisible. You believe you are choosing, when sometimes you are merely selecting from desires that were already handed to you. This is close to one of the strongest ideas in the reference we are modeling. Many people may experience themselves as independently choosing, while actually being carried by collective preferences and circumstances, without recognizing the pressure shaping those choices. Jung was deeply concerned with the danger of unconscious identification with the collective. Because the less conscious the individual becomes, the easier it is to disappear psychologically into the crowd. You adopt opinions because everyone around you holds them. You pursue goals because people around you admire them. You fear being behind because everyone appears to be racing. You construct a persona designed for recognition within a system you never consciously chose. And then one day you achieve something and feel nothing. This can be profoundly confusing. You thought you wanted it. Maybe you spent 10 years pursuing it. But perhaps what you actually wanted was what it represented: approval, status, belonging, safety, proof. Perhaps you wanted your parents to finally respect you. Perhaps you wanted people who rejected you to regret it. Perhaps you wanted to prove that you were not ordinary. Perhaps you wanted enough money that you would never feel powerless again. Perhaps you wanted a relationship because being single made you feel defective. The external goal may have been carrying an internal psychological assignment. And when you finally obtain the external thing, it cannot complete the internal assignment. Money cannot permanently answer, "Am I enough?" A relationship cannot permanently answer, "Am I worthy?" Recognition cannot permanently answer, "Do I matter?" Success cannot permanently answer, "Who am I?" So the person reaches the goal and creates another, then another, always moving, always constructing, always becoming impressive, but never asking whether the person doing all this construction has actually been consciously formed. This is where the original philosophical insight becomes especially useful. A person can spend enormous energy building achievements, projects, possessions, and external structures, while neglecting the more fundamental work of constructing their own character and inner orientation. Jung allows us to take that insight one step deeper. Perhaps you do not simply need to construct yourself.
Perhaps first you need to discover who has been constructing you. Your family, your culture, your wounds, your fear, your persona, your need for belonging, your unlived shadow. Because if you never investigate these forces, you may spend decades perfecting a person you never consciously chose to become. The moment your old goals stop feeling like yours. There is a strange phase of psychological development that can frighten people. Things that used to motivate you stop working. Recognition feels less important. Certain relationships begin feeling exhausting. Conversations you once tolerated feel empty. Goals that once seemed urgent lose their emotional charge. You may even wonder whether something is wrong with you. Why don't I care anymore? Why am I losing ambition? Why do I want to be alone? Why does my old life suddenly feel artificial? Sometimes there are ordinary explanations for these experiences. Exhaustion, stress, life changes. But psychologically, there is another possibility worth considering. The persona may be losing authority. A goal that belonged to the adapted personality may no longer satisfy the deeper psyche. This does not mean you should impulsively abandon your career, relationship, responsibilities, or entire life. That would be another form of unconsciousness. But it does mean the loss of old motivation deserves investigation. Ask, who wanted this? The question sounds simple. It isn't. Did you want it because it expressed something genuine? Or because achieving it would make you finally feel acceptable? Did you choose the relationship because you loved the person, or because being chosen relieved an old wound? Did you choose the career because the work mattered to you, or because success created an identity your family respected? Did you become endlessly helpful because compassion is one of your deepest values, or because usefulness became your strategy for securing love? The answer may be both. Human motives are rarely pure. But becoming conscious means becoming capable of seeing the mixture. And once you see it, something changes. You may continue pursuing the same goal, but now you pursue it for a different reason. Or you may realize the goal has completed its psychological purpose. Then, letting go becomes possible. This can feel like losing yourself, but perhaps you are not losing yourself. Perhaps you are losing an agreement you made with the world before you knew you were allowed to negotiate. And beneath that agreement, another life may be waiting. The most dangerous moment in change. There is a point where awareness becomes uncomfortable enough that many people retreat. You have recognized the pattern. You understand where it came from. You see how it has shaped relationships, decisions, and opportunities. You can no longer completely pretend you do not know. But you have not yet become someone different. This is the space between identities. The old self is no longer fully believable. The emerging self is not yet fully embodied. And there are few psychological states more uncertain than this one. You may feel lost, lonely, unmotivated, restless. You may begin questioning choices you once considered obvious. People around you may not understand. They may ask, "What's happened to you?" And perhaps you do not know how to answer. Because nothing obvious has happened. You are still you. And yet something fundamental has shifted. You have started seeing the machinery behind your identity. You see when the persona speaks. You notice when the old fear chooses. You recognize when approval is driving you. You catch projection more quickly. You notice the moment you begin abandoning yourself. But awareness creates responsibility. Before, you could say, "That's just who I am." Now that sentence no longer works as easily. You have seen alternatives. And once an alternative becomes conscious, repetition feels different. This is why knowledge can initially increase suffering. Before awareness, you simply repeat. After awareness, you watch yourself repeat. That can be painful. You know you are about to send the message you promised not to send. You know you're about to say yes when you mean no. You know you are shrinking again. You know you are creating an excuse. You know you are returning to the same person. And sometimes, you do it anyway. This does not mean awareness failed. This is often the beginning. First, you recognize the pattern afterward, then, while it is happening, then, just before, and eventually, you recognize it early enough to choose. That gap between impulse and action may initially last only a few seconds, but those few seconds contain something your old identity never had. Possibility. And possibility is how repetition begins to break. The gap where your old self loses power. Most people imagine transformation as a dramatic event, a breakthrough, a realization, a moment when everything suddenly becomes clear. But some of the deepest psychological changes happen in moments so small that nobody else notices them. Someone disappoints you. Normally, you would immediately try to repair the connection. You would explain yourself, send another message, make yourself smaller. Try to restore harmony before asking whether harmony was actually your responsibility. But this time, you feel the impulse and wait. Nothing spectacular happens. You simply do not obey it immediately. That pause may last 10 seconds, but psychologically, something enormous has occurred. For perhaps the first time, there is a distinction between you and the pattern. Before, the impulse felt like truth. Now, it becomes something you can observe. This is one of the most important transitions in psychological development. You begin to discover that not everything happening inside you deserves authority. A thought can appear without becoming a command. An emotion can rise without becoming an identity. A fear can exist without determining your next action. An old wound can become activated without being allowed to write the next chapter. This is what consciousness changes. It does not necessarily remove the old reaction. It changes your relationship to it. Imagine that someone criticizes you. For years, criticism has activated the same sequence. You hear the words, your body tightens. Something inside you immediately interprets the criticism as rejection. Then shame appears. Then defense. Then perhaps anger. You attack, withdraw, explain, or spend hours replaying the conversation. Because this sequence has happened so many times, it feels instantaneous. But awareness begins separating the pieces. Criticism happened. Then an interpretation happened. Then an emotion appeared. Then an old complex became activated. Then an impulse followed. Then you acted. Those are not one event. They are a chain. And if you can see the chain, you may eventually interrupt it. At first, you notice afterward, I did it again. Later, you notice while it is happening, I'm doing it again. Then, one day, something remarkable occurs. You notice just before, I'm about to do it again. That moment is the doorway. Because now the old self is present, but it is no longer alone. Consciousness is there too. And the first time you choose differently, it may feel completely unnatural. You might say no and immediately feel guilty. You might remain silent instead of defending yourself and feel terrified that you are losing control. You might refuse to chase someone and spend the entire evening wanting to contact them. You might accept an opportunity while every thought in your mind tells you that you are not ready. You might show your work while expecting humiliation. You might tell the truth and feel your entire body asking you to retreat. Do not underestimate these moments, because transformation rarely begins by feeling like transformation. Often, it feels like anxiety. Why doing the right thing can feel wrong. This is where many people misinterpret their own growth.
They assume, if this new behavior were really right for me, it would feel natural. But why would it? If you have spent 20 years apologizing whenever someone is disappointed in you, setting a boundary will not initially feel natural. Apologizing feels natural. If you have spent 20 years hiding your work, visibility will not feel natural. Hiding feels natural. If you have spent your life earning love, receiving love without performing for it may not feel natural. Earning feels natural. If you have always avoided conflict, honest disagreement may feel dangerous. Avoidance feels safe. The nervous system often confuses familiarity with safety, and the ego often confuses familiarity with identity. So when you behave differently, your inner world may respond as if something has gone wrong. Guilt appears, fear appears, doubt appears. You think, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should explain. Maybe I'm becoming selfish. Maybe this isn't really me. Maybe I should go back. And this is precisely where the old identity attempts to recover its position. It does not necessarily say, remain psychologically imprisoned. It says something much more convincing. Be reasonable. Don't hurt anyone. Wait until you're ready. Think about it a little longer. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you should give them another chance. Sometimes those thoughts are wise, but sometimes they are fear disguised as wisdom. How do you know the difference? You begin studying the pattern. Does this voice appear every time you're about to do something that contradicts your old identity? Does guilt appear whenever you prioritize yourself? Does doubt appear whenever you become visible? Does sudden exhaustion appear whenever a project becomes important? Does compassion suddenly become overwhelming whenever you need to leave someone who repeatedly hurts you? Does being realistic appear whenever your life begins expanding? Patterns reveal motives that individual thoughts can hide. One thought may be convincing. 20 years of the same thought appearing at the same psychological threshold is evidence. And once you recognize that threshold, you can begin asking, is something truly wrong? Or does this simply feel wrong because I have never allowed myself to live this way before? That question can change a life. You cannot wait for your old self to approve your new life. There is a fantasy hidden inside many attempts at change. We imagine that one day we will feel completely ready. The fear will disappear. Confidence will arrive. The inner critic will become silent. The past will stop hurting. We will finally feel like the person capable of doing what needs to be done. Then we will act. But this creates a psychological trap, because you are asking the old identity to give permission for its own replacement. Imagine waiting for the part of you built around invisibility to feel comfortable being seen, waiting for the people pleaser to feel completely comfortable disappointing someone, waiting for the perfectionist to feel ready to produce imperfect work, waiting for the abandoned child to feel no anxiety before trusting someone, waiting for the fearful part to approve courage. You may wait forever. Sometimes the feeling of readiness comes after the behavior. You act while afraid. Then your psyche receives new evidence. You say no. Someone is disappointed. And the world does not end. New evidence. You express an opinion. Someone disagrees. You survive. New evidence. You finish the project. It is imperfect. Nothing catastrophic happens. New evidence. You stop chasing. The person does not return. You experience the grief and discover that you can carry it. New evidence. You accept an opportunity before feeling fully prepared. You learn while doing it. New evidence. Gradually, your psychological map changes. The old identity said, if you do this, something terrible will happen. Experience begins answering, sometimes it doesn't. And even more importantly, sometimes something difficult happens and I can survive it. That second discovery is often more powerful than the first, because confidence does not require believing that nothing painful will happen. Real confidence can emerge from discovering that pain no longer has the power to determine who you must become. Change requires evidence, not just intention. You can repeat, "I am confident." But if every important decision is still organized around avoiding judgment, your psyche receives another message. You can say, "I value myself." But if you repeatedly abandon your needs whenever someone threatens to leave, behavior teaches the unconscious something else. You can say, "I deserve success." But if you disappear every time your work begins attracting attention, the old identity continues receiving evidence. This is why transformation cannot remain entirely inside thought. The psyche learns through lived experience. You must gradually give it evidence that another way of being is possible. This does not require pretending to be someone you are not. In fact, pretending can strengthen the persona. The point is not to perform confidence. It is to take small actions that the old identity would normally forbid. There is an important practical insight in the philosophical reference behind this theme. Qualities become part of a person through repeated lived practice, not merely through abstract admiration. This is where that principle becomes psychologically powerful. Suppose you want to become more courageous. Do not begin by asking, "How can I eliminate fear?" Ask, "What would one small act of courage look like while fear is still here?" Maybe it is sending the application, having the conversation, showing the work, admitting you were wrong, asking for help, saying no, leaving, staying, beginning, finishing. The act matters because it creates evidence, and evidence slowly changes identity. You stop saying, "I want to become someone who can set boundaries." Eventually, you realize, "I am someone who sets boundaries, even when it is uncomfortable." Notice the difference. The first is an aspiration. The second is an identity supported by experience. But we must be careful here, because there is another trap waiting. You can escape one rigid identity only to build another. The new persona can become another prison. Suppose you spend years being passive. Then you discover boundaries. At first, this is liberating. You begin saying no, protecting your time, speaking honestly. But gradually, you begin identifying with being the person who never tolerates anything. Now, flexibility feels like weakness. Forgiveness feels like surrender. Compromise feels like betrayal. You escaped one persona and built another. Or perhaps you were emotionally dependent. You begin developing independence. You learn to enjoy solitude, stop chasing people, become more self-reliant. Wonderful. But eventually, you begin taking pride in needing nobody. Now, intimacy feels threatening. Receiving help feels weak. Dependence of any kind becomes shameful. Again, a new persona. This is why Jungian transformation cannot simply mean becoming the opposite of what you were. If you were weak, become strong. If you were dependent, become independent. If you were silent, become outspoken. If you were accommodating, become uncompromising. Opposites can be psychologically useful during development, but wholeness eventually asks for something more difficult. The ability to contain both sides consciously. Strength that can admit vulnerability. Independence that can accept intimacy. Kindness that can say no. Confidence that can admit uncertainty. Discipline that can rest. Ambition that does not require self-destruction. Reason that can listen to feeling. The goal is not to move from one extreme to another. The goal is to become less possessed by either extreme. This is why individuation is not about creating the perfect personality. It is about expanding consciousness enough to hold more of what you actually are. The ego wants a clean answer. Tell me who I should become. The self does not always give clean answers. Sometimes it asks you to hold contradictions. And contradictions make the ego uncomfortable, because the ego prefers labels: good, bad, strong, weak, successful, failure, independent, dependent. But psychological wholeness often exists between categories. You can be afraid and courageous. You can love someone and still leave them. You can forgive someone and never allow them close again. You can be strong and exhausted. You can be successful and uncertain. You can be compassionate and angry. You can understand why someone hurt you without accepting what they did. You can outgrow a person without making them evil. The more psychologically mature you become, the less your identity depends on simple categories. And this creates freedom, because you no longer need to defend a fixed image of yourself every moment. You can respond to reality, not merely to the role you believe you must maintain. The people around you may resist your transformation, but there is another force that keeps people psychologically unchanged. Other people. Not always intentionally. Families, friendships, workplaces, and relationships develop systems. Inside those systems, everyone occupies a certain position. Perhaps you are the responsible one, the emotional one, the successful one, the difficult one, the quiet one, the helper, the peacemaker, the one who always forgives, the one who needs rescuing, the one who never causes problems. People learn how to relate to that version of you. Then you change. You stop automatically solving everyone's problems. Someone becomes uncomfortable. You begin setting boundaries. Someone says, "You've changed." You stop explaining every decision. Someone calls you distant. You stop tolerating disrespect. Someone says you have become arrogant. You stop participating in family conflict. Someone accuses you of abandoning everyone. And suddenly, transformation has a social cost. This is extremely important, because the old identity did not exist only inside your mind. It existed inside relationships. Other people knew how to access it. They knew what produced guilt, what made you surrender, what made you explain, what made you rescue, what made you return. Sometimes unconsciously, people will attempt to restore the version of you they understand. Not because they are evil, because systems seek equilibrium. When one person changes, everyone around them must adjust, and not everyone wants to. Imagine a relationship where one person always sacrifices and the other always receives. The sacrificing person begins changing. Now the receiving person must either become more reciprocal or lose the relationship. The change of one person exposes the adaptation of the other. This is why growth can create conflict. Your old identity may have been solving psychological problems for other people. Your silence protected someone from accountability. Your endless forgiveness protected someone from consequences. Your insecurity allowed someone to feel powerful. Your dependence allowed someone to feel indispensable. Your lack of boundaries gave someone unlimited access. Then you change. And suddenly their psychological comfort is threatened too. This is one reason becoming yourself sometimes feels lonely. You begin discovering which relationships love your presence and which relationships depended on your role. There is a difference, and learning that difference can hurt. The sentence that can keep you trapped for years. But they won't understand. How many lives have been organized around this sentence? They won't understand why I changed careers. They won't understand why I left. They won't understand why I stopped visiting. They won't understand why I need space. They won't understand why I no longer want what I used to want. They won't understand why I am different. Maybe they won't. And sometimes being understood matters. Communication matters. Compassion matters. We should not use growth as an excuse for cruelty or irresponsibility. But there comes a point where requiring universal understanding becomes another form of psychological captivity. If everyone must understand your transformation before you are allowed to live it, then everyone still has authority over it. This is particularly difficult for people whose persona was built around approval. They do not simply want to make the right decision. They want to make the right decision without anyone being disappointed. But some decisions make disappointment unavoidable. You cannot become more honest without disappointing people who benefited from your silence. You cannot become more boundaried without disappointing people who benefited from your availability. You cannot become more authentic without confusing people who are attached to your performance. Sometimes the price of becoming more psychologically whole is allowing someone to misunderstand you. And this can activate enormous guilt. But guilt does not always mean you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt means you have violated an old internal rule. The rule may have been, never disappoint anyone, never put yourself first, never challenge authority, never become more successful than the people around you, never leave the role the family gave you. When you break one of these unconscious rules, guilt appears like an alarm. The question is the alarm protecting morality or conformity? That distinction requires deep honesty. And if you're recognizing one of these old rules in your own life, you might write it down somewhere after this video. Not to judge it, just to see it. Because a rule you can see consciously has less power than a rule you mistake for reality. Why some people return to their old self after making real progress. You can change, genuinely. Then return to an old behavior. This frightens people. They think, everything I did was useless. But psychological transformation is rarely linear. Under stress, the psyche often returns to familiar strategies. You become exhausted, rejected, overwhelmed, lonely, afraid. And suddenly the old behavior appears. You chase, withdraw, people please, procrastinate, attack, disappear. The mistake is believing that the return of an old pattern means no change occurred. The better question is, what happens after the pattern returns? Do you remain unconscious for 6 months? Or do you recognize it after 6 days, 6 hours, 6 minutes? The speed of recognition matters. So does the way you respond afterward. The old identity says, see, you'll never change. But that thought itself may be part of the old pattern. It turns one repetition into an identity. You made one fearful choice, therefore, I am still weak. You contacted someone you promised yourself you would stop chasing, therefore, I have learned nothing. You procrastinated, therefore, I am hopeless. Be careful. Perfectionism can disguise itself as transformation. It demands that growth erase your humanity. But consciousness does not mean never repeating. It means repetition becomes increasingly visible, and visibility changes its power. Before, you were the pattern. Now, you experience the pattern. That difference may sound small. It isn't. If you can say, a part of me wants to run, instead of, I have to run, you have already created psychological space. If you can say, an old fear is telling me I will be rejected, instead of, I know they will reject me. Space. If you can say, I feel the need to prove myself, instead of immediately proving yourself, space. And inside that space, a different future becomes possible. This is why the goal is not to destroy the old self. It is to stop allowing the old self to operate invisibly, because what is visible can be questioned. What can be questioned can be chosen differently. And what is repeatedly chosen differently eventually begins to change who you are. The person you become is built in the moment you choose. And perhaps this is the part most people misunderstand about transformation. You do not wake up one morning as a completely different person. There may never be a dramatic moment when the old fears disappear, the shadow becomes silent, and every part of you finally agrees with the life you want to live. The old voice may still speak. The old wound may still react. The familiar impulse may still appear. But something has changed. You can see it. And once you can see it, you no longer have to become it.
That is where freedom begins. Not when the past disappears, not when fear disappears, not when you finally construct a flawless personality, but when the unconscious pattern that once chose for you
becomes visible enough that you can choose for yourself. Maybe the pattern says, chase them, and you remain still. Maybe it says, hide, and you allow yourself to be seen. Maybe it says, say yes so they won't be disappointed. And for the first time, you say no. Maybe it says, you're not ready, and you begin anyway. Maybe it says, go back. At least you know who you are there. And despite the uncertainty, you keep moving forward. These decisions may look insignificant from the outside. No one applauds them. No one may even know they happened. But psychologically, they are enormous. Because every conscious choice removes a little authority from the identity that once controlled you. And slowly, something extraordinary happens. The unfamiliar becomes familiar. The boundary that once filled you with guilt becomes natural. The silence you once interpreted as rejection no longer destroys your peace. The opportunity you once would have sabotaged becomes something you can receive. The love you once would have distrusted becomes something you can experience without constantly testing it. The person you once needed to impress loses their power over you. And one day, you encounter a situation that would have activated the old version of you, and you respond differently. Perhaps only afterward do you realize it. You didn't chase. You didn't shrink. You didn't explain yourself endlessly. You didn't abandon yourself. You simply responded from somewhere else. And in that moment, you understand something. You were not waiting to become this person. You were becoming this person every time you chose differently. That is why real transformation is quieter than people imagine. It happens in hundreds of invisible decisions. The moment you recognize projection instead of immediately blaming. The moment you listen to anger and discover the boundary hidden beneath it. The moment you recognize that your persona is a role, not your entire identity. The moment you stop confusing familiar pain with love. The moment you allow a rejected part of yourself back into consciousness. The moment you question a goal you inherited from everyone else. The moment you realize that a thought can belong to you without defining you. This is the work of becoming conscious. And perhaps this is why Jung's psychology remains so uncomfortable. Because eventually, you can no longer ask only, why does this keep happening to me? You also have to ask, what inside me keeps participating in this pattern? Not as accusation, as discovery. Because the moment you discover your participation, you also discover your possibility. You cannot choose everything that happens to you. You cannot rewrite your childhood. You cannot control whether someone stays. You cannot guarantee success. You cannot prevent every rejection, betrayal, loss, or disappointment. But you can become increasingly conscious of the part of you that responds, and that changes everything. Because perhaps the greatest prison was never the pattern itself. Perhaps it was believing, this is simply who I am. You are not only the person who learned to survive. You are not only the persona the world learned to recognize. You are not only the fear that speaks when life becomes uncertain. You are not only the shadow you tried to hide. You are not only the story you have repeated for years. There is something within you capable of observing all of these things. And the more conscious that observer becomes, the less automatically the old story has to continue. So if you take one question from this entire exploration, let it be this. What pattern in my life have I been calling my personality? Sit with that, because the answer may reveal something you have been trying to change for years. And if one pattern came to mind while listening, you can leave just one word in the comments. What are you ready to stop repeating? You do not need to explain the entire story. Just name the pattern. Because sometimes naming what has been unconscious is already the beginning of separating yourself from it. And if this exploration helped you see yourself differently, stay with the kingdom within. Because the purpose of this work is not to become someone artificial, It is not to manufacture a more impressive mask. It is to become conscious enough that the life you create is no longer being silently chosen by the parts of yourself you have never examined. Most people spend their lives trying to change circumstances. Some spend their lives trying to change behavior. But the deepest transformation begins when you finally turn toward the hidden structure beneath both and ask, who inside me has been choosing my life? Because once that person is no longer hidden, the repetition is no longer inevitable. The past may explain you. The unconscious may influence you. The old identity may still call you back, but none of them have to be the final authority. And perhaps that is what becoming yourself truly means. Not creating someone new, not destroying who you were, but becoming conscious enough to finally choose who you become.